Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you at our session. Let me start by thanking our hosts, the city of Nur-Sultan, and organizers of this incredible event. Very interesting, full of interesting topics, relevant ideas for the current world and global problems challenging all of us. I would like to thank you for organizing this very important event, and this is a great opportunity for us today to discuss important issues for the region of Central Asia. We have a distinguished panel with outstanding panel participants here, and I believe that we will have a very interesting session, very interesting conversation, and maybe we will find answers to some important questions. Of course, the environment surrounding us today is, I would say, not very positive. The world economy undergoes fundamental changes. Protectionism is rising. We have trade wars, we have cross-sanctions, we have declining trade, we have slowing global economy, and we have geopolitical risks also, including in this region. We have Brexit. We have questioning of paradigm of central bank independence. And these are all ready-made recipes for anyone to think that we are approaching something which we might call a global economic crisis or downturn. And at this background, it becomes even more important to think and look for regional, additional growth engines. And we are now in a region, and particularly in a country, which shows outstanding stability, creating a platform for international cooperation, showing good growth rates, also including regionally. And we have 5 countries with relative stability. Afghanistan, which is considered also a part of Central Asia, unfortunately is not stable yet, but at least in 5 Central Asian countries we have stability, and we have a very good background and foundation to build something new, to create extra oxygen for the economies of Central Asian countries. And the regional trade nowadays is becoming, intra-regional trade is becoming a topic which can be considered as an extra growth engine for the regional economies. Unfortunately, until now, due to the differences in trade policies among the Central Asian countries, due to the lack of modern infrastructure and logistics capabilities, and some other reasons, there is still enormous room for development of the intra-regional trade. This is why we are here to discuss this new narrative of Central Asia, the connectivity among the Central Asian countries, and we have a truly distinguished panel today. And let me now introduce panel members, starting from the person sitting next to me, Mr. Vasil Hudak. He is a Vice President of European Investment Bank. He is very actively engaged in this region. Vasil has been for 3 years with European Investment Bank. Before that, he was a chief negotiator of the EU during Slovakian presidency on budget issues, which is a very difficult task. I hope you agree with me. He was a Minister of Economy in Slovakia, and he has very extensive private sector background, also working with JP Morgan Chase, Eastern Europe. So welcome, Mr. Vasil Hudak, and since I know almost all of you, I will call you with first names to make also our discussion more dynamic. Dimitri Pankin, Mr. Dimitri Pankin. He is president of Black Sea Trade and Development Bank. And it's very important that a person chairing this important institution dealing with the Black Sea Basin countries is now with us, because we will be talking about connectivity. And when we are talking about connectivity with Black Sea Basin banks and Black Sea region banks is extremely important for Central Asia. So welcome, Mr. Dimitri Pankin here. Dimitri, welcome. Mr. Bruno Balvanera, next to him, is a Managing Director of Central Asia of EBRD. He just came from Caucasus, Moldova and Belarus. He was a director for Caucasus, Moldova and Belarus. He left a very successful term in Georgia and very successful legacy, boosting the portfolio of the bank to incredible numbers. And I believe that his presence here in Central Asia will be an additional important asset for this region. Welcome, Bruno. Ms. Lilia Burunchuk is also the regional director of the World Bank here in Central Asia. Lilia has been with the World Bank for many years, for decades. She's very experienced, worked at different positions within the bank, and also before that she was a deputy governor of Central Bank, introducing important reforms in Moldova on the monetary policy and central bank regulations. Next to Lilia, we have Konstantin Limitovsky. He is representing AIIB, and it was a last-minute change. And welcome, Konstantin. Konstantin is a senior advisor to the president of AIIB. He has also very extensive background in private sector, particularly with VTB on PPP deals. He's especially experienced in that particular area. So welcome to this discussion. And we have Luc Devine, Director of European External Action Service. It's been a long time that he is with the European Union, different structures. Most recently, he was head of unit Russia, CIS, Ukraine, Western Balkans, EFTA, EEA, Turkey, and Central Asia during around 6 years. He was also a head of unit of market access, industry, energy, and raw materials during 2016-17. I can tell you that as a former Prime Minister of Georgia, I can tell you that he was the most difficult negotiator during DCFTA negotiations with Georgia. So, look, welcome. This shows his character, by the way. It happened many times during negotiations that he walked away from the room. So.
Then he came back.
Yes, he came back and we had very successful negotiations. I'm Georgi Kvirikashvili. I'm working for EBRD right now with Uzbekistan, setting up a Foreign Investors Council there under the president. Before I was Prime Minister of Georgia, several ministerial positions, Member of Parliament, etc. I'm very pleased to be here and to face this extremely welcoming audience, all of you. And let me start with first question. Given the environment which I just described, it's extremely important to develop intra-regional trade, as I mentioned. And let me start from Vasil. How do you see the role of the international financial institution you represent to support development of effective infrastructure and connectivity, connecting local and international economic corridors, and to promote regional cooperation and integration? And when we talk about connectivity, please don't only concentrate on the hard infrastructure, and please also concentrate on soft infrastructure. Thank you. Vasil, please.
Thank you, Georgi, and again, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you to the organizers for inviting also European Investment Bank. Maybe before I answer your question, just to give the context, European Investment Bank is the Bank of the European Union. It's the financial arm of the European Union. We are owned by the 28 member states, at least until Brexit. Maybe Luke knows more, but until Brexit, we are still in the hands of 28. The bank was created in 1958. It was basically at the time when European Union came together, but it was facing many problems with the economic growth, but also in terms of how to create more closer union in economic and other terms. So since that time, in the last 60 years, the issue of integration and regional cross-border cooperation has been part of the genetic code of the bank. This was the reason why the bank was created for Europe, to promote economic growth, to promote closer cooperation among the countries, both, as Georgi, as you mentioned, both in terms of the hard infrastructure, cross-border connections in transport, in energy, but also in terms of soft infrastructure. And this is the philosophy which we share, not only inside the European Union, but also outside. We are, as I mentioned, financial arm of the European Union, so we follow the strategy and priorities of the EU, and I'm sure Luke will talk more about those, so I will focus more on the financial side. So we believe that Central Asia, as the territory which is somewhere in the middle of different poles of influence. We have certainly China as the growing important global power, which has important influence in this region. We have continuation of Russian influence. We have influence of Turkey, Iran, certainly Europe, which would like to play a more active role in this area. So all these pieces of influence do have an impact in the area itself. But for the region itself to be competitive and to grow as a peaceful region, we believe that it has to develop its own connectivity and its own regional cooperation. So the role of the bank, as we see it, is to promote such cross-border connectivity. This has to be based, obviously, on strong and resilient domestic economies. During the last 10 years of our operations in the 4 countries, because we do not operate so far in Turkmenistan, but in the 4 countries of this region where we do operate, we have provided loans and different types of other financing at the level of around 1 billion euro. And this has gone also to cross-border projects. One of those, which is quite well known, is the CASA 1000, which de facto will bring electricity from the upstream countries like Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, down to Afghanistan and Pakistan. So this is a very clear way how to connect the region also in a broader context. We are also looking at ways how to develop transport infrastructure. We are the major provider of financing for transport projects in the EU, and annually we finance transport projects at the volume of around 12 billion euro. So we believe that this type of connectivity has to be developed, and maybe I would use one example, which is from Central Europe, where I come from. As Georgi mentioned, I'm from Slovakia, and you probably know the V4, so-called Visegrad 4 countries, which is Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. They have been developing a regional or sub-regional cooperation for several years, since 1993. And I think they have developed quite interesting concepts which could be also replicated in Central Asia in terms of free trade, in terms of trade promotion. Obviously, all this facilitated by the membership in the European Union. But one new initiative which we are doing, and this reflects the fact that despite the fact that these are countries which are in the same region, which want to cooperate, actually still do not have enough cross-border connectivity. Yes. And one of the, especially in the north-south context, there is quite a lot of connectivity east-west, but very little north-south. So when you travel, for example, from Bratislava to Budapest, you go by highway, and 4 kilometers before the border, the highway stops, and then again starts on the Hungarian side 4 kilometers after the border. And this is typical also for the railways, etc. And it's a result of the fact that all these countries have been historically focusing on developing their national economies and infrastructure. So we do need additional momentum and additional, I would say, even institutional focus on this cross-border connectivity. So we are now in the process of developing so-called V4 investment and advisory platform. Basically, it should be a way how the countries would develop capacity for developing and structuring cross-border projects in the area. And maybe this could be also an interesting idea for Central Asian region. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasil. It's very interesting that you created V4 investment and advisory platform for Visegrad countries. And maybe it can be also an interesting experience for this region in order to harmonize internally the regulations and make it more complementary to each other. Dimitri, as a president of Black Sea Trade and Development Bank, you are doing a lot in the Black Sea region to promote trade through various special instruments to promote investment in the Black Sea region. How do you see internal connectivity as an important driver for economic growth? And could you also bring some examples from Black Sea region of your engagement of promoting trade as an important driver for economic growth? And how do you see the prospects in Central Asia, how they are relevant, what are the differences or what are the resemblance among the countries and between the regions of the Central Asia and Black Sea region? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Georgi. Again, we are very close as a Black Sea Trade and Development Bank for Middle Asia. We have 11 country shareholders in our bank. All countries are around Black Sea, including Turkey, Greece, Russia, Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. And we have 20-year experience now. So bank is working for 20 years. And most important, still alive. So I think that most important lesson from that story and beauty of our bank, that we are working in very difficult political environment. We have a lot of political problem between our country shareholder. You mean, I mentioned that we have Russia and Ukraine in our bank. We have Armenia and Azerbaijan in our bank. We have Greece and Turkey. And we are finding decision. We are financing project. All decisions are taken by our board of governors, board of directors, and directors represent all our country. It means that I think very serious lesson for all development banks. This institution should be out of politics, out of political tensions, and in very difficult areas, Balkans, Russia, Ukraine, Caucasus, we could find solution. I think this could be the story learned for Central Asia, because again, here in Central Asia, we have a very long history of conflict, mistrust between countries. But in order to have regional connectivity, first of all, what will be necessary? It's necessary to have political will, trust, and then it is possible to create common infrastructure, I mean physical infrastructure, institutional infrastructure. It's possible to create. Before, if we have no political trust, it will be very difficult. So, for development bank, as I mentioned, we are taking mainly only economically reasonable project. And maybe one of major shift in our strategy, we started as a bank financing mainly private sector, small project. Now we took a strategic decision to move more to public sector, because we have a lot of opportunity, a lot of gap in infrastructure in our region, and bank will try to work more with infrastructure project. In that case, I think a very important question, how will we work with other development bank? Of course, we have no such capacity, no such volume of finance like my neighbors, like European Investment Bank, like European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, like Asian Development Bank. That's why we need to find our niche. And niche, it exists. let's take, for example, big gas project in our area, like TANAP project. This multi-billion project are financed by European Investment Bank, by BRD, by Asian Development Bank. But again, now we are trying to find kind of local gas system to distribute gas to municipality. Now, for example, we're financing creating of gas storage in Greece. We are providing trade finance for SOCAR. This is the biggest Turkish company. This company is buying oil and gas from Azerbaijan. So we're trying to find maybe not very big, but medium-sized project linked with big transcontinental project. And I think so this area it's very important, and it will help a lot of in regional development. And again, let me say something about Middle Asia. In a previous session, we had like expression, what is it Middle Asia? It's something between China and Europe. China, we have a big economic power. Europe, we have a biggest economic power. And here, goods are just going from China to Europe and coming back. I think this approach for Middle Asia is totally wrong. If we are looking as a Middle Asia as a transit country, we cannot facilitate local growth. It will be just people watching train going from Beijing to Hamburg, something like this. And question is not only to develop this transit road, but to create local connectivity, local links between this country. We had, in my previous position in Eurasian Development Bank, we had a lot of study about connectivity. And one of clear conclusion was that for landlocked country like Kazakhstan, like many neighbors like Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, answer is not open all borders and to be integrated without all barriers in the world economy. Answer is to create most favorable conditions for regional integration. Regional integration, this is answer for landlocked country. That's why for I think question of connectivity not between China and Europe, but connectivity between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, this is much more important and take a lot of attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important insight from a person who runs a bank focused on the Black Sea region, and you mentioned that your institution has to be neutral, and I fully agree with you because trade has a healing quality also for some wounds, and I believe that developing trade can also help improving relations between the countries. Bruno, as a managing director for Central Asia plus Mongolia, you are here to represent a bank which is very aggressive, very active in this region. You left behind Caucasus, Moldova, and Belarus, and with an extremely positive track during the last several years. How do you see the role of EBRD to promote regional infrastructure development, developing hard infrastructure plus developing soft infrastructure such as financial connectivity, the border-to-border easing and smoothing the border crossing procedures, etc., etc. How do you see the role of your institution in that?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Georgi, and thank you very much to invite me to this panel, to the organizers, beautiful, sunny Nur Sultan, and to be sharing the podium with so distinguished colleagues from sister and brother organizations. Yes, it is true we are now in Central Asia. We're talking about connectivity. In my previous capacity, I was probably at the other end of the equation in Tbilisi when we were starting with the concept of the Belt and Road Initiative, where we were also talking about connectivity within the Caucasus, but further, all the way to Central Asia. Fortunately, I'm arriving to Central Asia with already well-established business of the bank in the 5 Central Asian countries plus Mongolia, where we have offices in each of the countries. In Kazakhstan, we have 2, of course, Almaty and Nur-Sultan, and we have also a number of satellite offices for SMEs. As Dimitri said, this is landlocked countries which require regional integration. I would also say that with the opening of Uzbekistan, this is also a region of the world where the neighbors do not have any open conflict with each other, and this should facilitate much more the trade. As was mentioned also by Dimitri, relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan is not easy, Georgia and Russia, Ukraine and Russia. But in this part of the world, we do not have any open, we do not have any frozen conflict as we have in other regions. And we should see this as an opportunity. You opened the panel, Georgi, with a bit of a negative assessment of the outlook because of the challenges and the constraints. As I have always been an optimist, I want to see the glass half full, not half empty, and I come to this region with a big interest in developing further the EBRD business. What I would like to say is, in addition to the opening of Uzbekistan, that is extremely important because it has not only open opportunities in Uzbekistan, but it has opened the communication between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and even Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. We also have the initiative of the Belt Road Initiative that was jointly launched between China and Kazakhstan here in Nur-Sultan a number of years ago, with the second game changer that is going to change the reality in the region. And the reality in the region is that this is the old Silk Road, but there's no roads. There's a deficit of roads. Vasily was mentioning EIB has built all the roads in Europe and all the corridors. Here, there are very few corridors. There's a lot of ideas behind Karek. There's a lot of traces already, but there is not such infrastructure. And in the roads in particular, EBRD has been financing a number of roads, most of them within countries. So, for example, now we are soon going to sign the agreement to finance a road between Atirau and the border of Russia, south of Astrakhan. We have also been working between Dushanbe and the Uzbekistan border, in Bishkek and Karikol. But we have not really, and the opportunity is there, to be financing road across countries. We have not seen that. Hopefully, during the time I'm here, we can make 2 countries agree on a road and we can have a joint financing. Roads, of course, is extremely important. Now, distances are very big and we should not leave behind air transportation. Air transportation is a must into the region. Kazakhstan in itself has a number of airlines. In Kazakhstan, the EBRD has financed both Astana Airport and Air Astana with their maintenance terminal. And we are exploring our participation in Kuzhand in Kyrgyzstan, in Tajikistan, sorry, as well as in Manas Airport in Kyrgyzstan. And who knows? Possibly now with the opening of Uzbekistan, Tashkent is a big hub, Almaty is a big hub, and we have in EBRD portfolio finance a number of airports, including long time ago Pulkovo Airport in St. Petersburg, not the only one. Rail is extremely important. If you look at the statistic of how the cargo goes between China and Europe, 92% goes by boat, about 5% goes by plane, and the remaining 3% only goes by rail. So there's a huge opportunity to move all this cargo through this region, and I reckon that there are many routes There's a route between Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Caspian Sea crossed through the Caucasus, but there's also the Russian line. There is the line to the south through Iran. But in roads, in rails, we have also been helping developing, particularly what is wagons and what is the movables on that one. Transmission lines, Vasily mentioned CASA 100. This is, of course, a huge opportunity. This is about connecting Afghanistan, and not only because the market is there, but also because of security reasons. We need to help to establish a better security in Afghanistan because it's a potential threat to the region. And Afghanistan has borders both with Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and both countries can export electricity to these markets, particularly in summer, when they do not need that. They have capacity for the whole year. They have more consumption in winter, but they could export then in summer. The region does not have ports, but we know nowadays that we can have dry ports. And it's very important logistics, and this connectivity is extremely important. In Horgos, in the border with Kazakhstan, the EBRD and China, the EBRD has financed the first or one of the first dry ports, which is extremely important in order to facilitate the logistics. Digital connectivity and the whole topic over the last 2 years about innovation and inclusion and leapfrog, you will not be able to do that if you do not have access to digital, to broadband, and to the digital conversion, switchover of the analog, where we have also been investing in a number of countries. We did that in Georgia a number of years ago, but this is also something that has happened here in this region of the world. Customs. In customs, in reality, and I remember very well, Georgi, when you were Prime Minister in Georgia, and we had one of these big Belt and Road conferences, you said something that I still remember. You said the efficiency of the Belt and Road initiative is dependent on the weakest link. So if something happens in the border between Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, this weakest link that you did not think is going to ruin the multi-billion investment that you are trying to put from China all the way to the Caucasus. So it's extremely important also to facilitate the customs and the regulations over there. Trade, of course, the future, the region is regional integration amongst themselves rather than to open to other regions. And in that respect, the EBRD has been pioneering the trade facilitation program. We work, of course, in all the countries. Overall, 2,500 operations, close to 2 billion euros of trade facilitation program. 40% of it is for intra-regional. This is a very good number. So we really have facilitated the trade between the countries. Tourism. Beautiful countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. You can create routes for tourists. We have this program of the cultural heritage where we want to bring tourists. We want to be able, the local providers, to offer them a menu of different destinations to have a bit more of a critical mass and to bring more tourists. And finally, nothing of this is going to happen if you do not nurture, protect, and help the development of the private sector. And this is why the platforms that we have created, that we have supported of investment climate, like the Foreign Investors Council in Kazakhstan, that is co-shared between President Chakrabarti and the President of Kazakhstan, or the Investors Council in the Kyrgyz Republic and Tajikistan, and of course the project you know very well in Uzbekistan, where we are creating again this platform to protect the interest of the private sector and to foster the investment. To conclude, I think there are many opportunities in the region. Of course, there are many challenges, but I would like to invite everybody to think global and to act local. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruno. Very important and comprehensive insight about how to promote trade and how does infrastructure help promoting regional trade. Lilia, role of the World Bank cannot be exaggerated in reforming the Central Asian countries, promoting structural, fundamental reforms in all of the countries of the region. And of course, also the financing through the sovereign financing, mainly financing infrastructure development. And of course, the Central Asia is a region which shows stability, and is still many of the countries of Central Asia are in need of fundamental structural reforms. But how do you particularly see the role of World Bank to promote infrastructure development, how to put it in the service of the trade development for the region? Can you also tell us some examples of your support of Central Asian countries where your support played an instrumental role for the development of the countries?
Yes, thank you. Central Asia is really a fascinating region. But when I was taking my position 3 years ago in Central Asia, and I was telling my colleagues I'm going to Central Asia, you know, the first thing I would hear from them was, it's in the middle of nowhere. And it actually used to be the center of knowledge of the world. It was actually the center of knowledge of the world 1,000 years ago. You may not know, but the first book of algebra was written here in Central Asia, and at the time it had the biggest library, knowledge library in the world. So it's good that the history sometimes repeats itself, and I must say that things are changing very rapidly. Central Asia now has the potential to again become center of connecting the world, because Central Asia is small, of course. It's very small today. And it needs to be linked to the rest of the world to survive as a region. But it's a region that is close to Russia, which is one of the regions that has abundant natural resources. It is close to Asia, and in the previous session, the number was given that more than 60% of the GDP of the world is already here around Central Asia. It is also close to Europe, where you have abundant institutional and human capital, and it's actually a route to Europe. And in terms of population, most of actually global population will live in this area by 2050, and the middle class, your consumers in the world, in 10-15 years, more than 80% of the middle class consumers will be around here. So it has a huge opportunity to again connect and be in the middle of the center of the world, but it can remain the middle of nowhere if it doesn't take the action. And I'm glad that we're discussing the new era of connectivity, because connectivity is key here. It's not only connectivity in terms of infrastructure. And this region, as we see that the World Bank has 3 big gaps. One gap is the infrastructure gap, of course. But the second very big gap is the trade gap. And the region doesn't trade that much with the rest of the world, but it doesn't trade that much even among the Central Asian countries. When we did some studies as part of the BRI study, and we looked at the BRI countries, which is larger than Central Asia, but Central Asia is part of it. So BRI countries undertrade among themselves by 30%. So they actually can trade much more, and just by trading among themselves, they can already get great benefits. And the third very big gap is the policy gap. It takes longer to go from just one country to another country in Central Asia than in many other countries in the world. 100 hours to cross the border between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and vice versa. 100 hours, that's a lot. The average for Europe and Central Asia, I think, is somewhere below 50. And in other countries is much, much lower. So there are many things that could be done, and borders need to become much more porous and not as thick as they are today. Now, in terms of infrastructure, we talk about connectivity in terms of roads and railways. We also need to talk about the digital infrastructure, because these are landlocked countries, and it's not easy for them to get connected to the rest of the world, although many improvements are already happening. But digital connectivity is easier, one may think, and it's actually an area where you can easily attract the private sector, and the region is still far behind on digital connectivity. So I think this is one area where more can be done, and the World Bank is heavily involved in this area. We do have a regional project which we call Digital Central Asia, South Asia. The same is Digital CASA, the same as the CASA 1000, this, Central Asia, South Asia electricity transmission line. Projects already being implemented in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and projects are being prepared in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. But just the World Bank effort is not enough. It has to be a much wider effort to help with the digital connectivity. Now, in terms of how the World Bank can add value to connectivity. First is through the analytical work and through diagnosis and helping countries decide what infrastructure is, in a way, makes sense, and if you are building infrastructure, how to build it in the best way. It's very easy to build white elephants or to build a piece of infrastructure that then doesn't connect further. Like in the session before this, there was a discussion about the East-West corridor, the road that goes from Western China all the way to Europe, and that Kazakhstan has already built its part to Russia, and that it all stopped at the border, and the Russian part is going much slower, and who knows when it will happen. So coordination and playing the role of the neutral partner and advising on selecting the infrastructure and also how to build it and what is the speed, and also helping with attracting financing for this infrastructure, I see as one of important roles of the World Bank and also other partners. Another important role, and this issue was also mentioned actually in the previous session, and I think it was mentioned by one of my colleagues in this session as well, is you don't want to just see trains going from west to east, from east to west. You also want to improve the regional connectivity. And here is where we can play an important role in improving regional connectivity. And also, if you are building a road, think about complementary investments. Think about regional roads. Think about labor movement. Think about maybe displacement of people from one industry to another, because one industry may become less attractive because imports will be easier through improved connectivity. And also invest in education and invest in creating the environment that will allow the development of the regional economy, and not just see the big negative effects, which are actually real from building connective infrastructure. And the last point I wanted to make is actually on the energy infrastructure, not only energy connectivity, but energy infrastructure in general. Central Asia has the potential of supplying renewable energy, solar, wind, and small hydro, even not big hydro, of electricity in the order of 6 terawatts. That's a huge number. If you look at how much Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, and West Asia consume today, is 2 terawatts. So 3 times more than this huge region needs today. Just the renewable energy that can be supplied just from Central Asia. So here is another huge potential in energy. But this energy needs to be developed, it needs to be built well. A lot of policy reforms are required for the private sector to come, because that's a sector where you can attract the private sector, but also you need to do it right. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilya. Very important information and feedback from you, and I believe that World Bank will continue its efforts to help and support these countries to create the new vibe and to promote fundamental structural reforms in these countries. Konstantin, you are with the AIIB, a relatively new multilateral development bank or international financial institution. How do you see, by the way, the first board meeting of AIIB and the appointment of the chairman happened in Tbilisi, Georgia. Georgians are supporters of this institution. How do you see the role of your institution to promote infrastructure? How do you engage in this development process, especially in Central Asia? And how do you see the role of, since you have an extensive background in PPPs, how do you see the role of the private sector, and how do you see the opportunity to leverage every dollar or euro or the currency spent by your institution through the private sector engagement?
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, first of all, I'm really glad that there's so big audience at the last day in the last session. So we're obviously discussing a very interesting topic. Yes, and if you allow me, I will not, make the presentation of AIB, because we indeed young and new international financial institutions, the youngest in the family. But I think that there was so much information of the period of our existence on the bank that I would rather not waste time on it, unless there will be specific questions. I actually was very, very impressed with the lady's premise. One argument about the historical one. It's really so that, and it's basically, it came to me that that it is a good argument to what Dmitry Vladimirovich said. One of these days, not that long ago, 1,000 years only, this region was the center of civilization, not only in terms of GDP per capita, but also in terms of the science. The scholars and the students wanted to go here to learn. And what else? I mean, the true center of civilization. So all we need to do is recall how it was done. And how it was done. It was done on the basis of the international trade. And there was a proper infrastructure there. So the interconnections and the connectivity in a wider region is very important, seems to be. That's what the history suggests. And, well, there is this famous proverb, which is local, regional, that once you decide to develop, you start with the building of the road. That's what Kazakhstan did, I think. So the beginning was with the unfolding of the program for the transit road construction. with the international investors, Chinese predominantly. There were 15 billion over the last 10 years invested, and the country, in fact, also arguing with. I have to argue. You know, you as a chair, you know, suggested that we need a dynamic discussion. So, you know, so I have already argued with my former boss, which gives me a real, you know, opportunity. Previously, I couldn't because I was with
the reason why you are here?
because I was it was with Eurasian Development Bank not that long ago. And now I'm arguing with Bruno that in fact the country has a pretty good and developed a lot and achieved a lot over the last 10 years, building up the road network of an international standard. But what is important really is that what Lily has also referred to is that it is not about just quickly building the backbone infrastructure. It is also how you manage the projects, and it is really important to manage them in a way to increase the local impact. And I think that international financial institutions can really help in that respect in developing the proper sustainable interconnection infrastructure, which would increase the intra-regional trade, which is really, as a World Bank studies suggested, and ADB as well, which is really minimal. And each percent of increase in the inter-regional trade leads to the really material increase in GDP. I think that 0.5% for each percent. And these countries of the Central Asia have a great deal of opportunities to explore it. Although a lot has been done, there are a lot of to be done. Apart from the outer roads, there's a underdeveloped infrastructure which was inherited from the Soviet Union and was directed into the different direction rather than the new trade flows are suggesting. So the railroad infrastructure, a railroad interconnectivity is also important, and it requires, I don't know, I was looking at statistic as well. It's more than 30 billion over the 10 years just for Kazakhstan. And let alone the power infrastructure, the electricity interconnection as well. The countries of the region, I think that they have a great unexplored potential for mutual benefit from the electricity trade. I mean, we are under the leadership of Mr. Pankin in the Eurasian Development Bank, we're looking at, and this is still the opportunity, I guess, to export electricity from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan into the other neighboring countries, but even farther, in order to in order to benefit from the oversupply during the certain seasonality during the summer, and sometimes even to explore the possibilities of the time difference if you can afford proper rehabilitation of infrastructure for the longer distances. Of course, the challenges of the region, and Kazakhstan in particular, not in particular, but as well, is that it is scarcely populated, and the long distances. That requires a great investments, and that will not be possible without IFIs. What I mean is that BRI is the good and efficient source, but it also matters to do the investment project with the maximizing the local impact, as I said, not only thinking about the transition, and also with the due regard to the transparency, with the due regard to the environmental consequences. It's very important, and socially responsible way. And then coming to your direct question, we are in this business. We are created in order to help the countries who created us, 97 countries, to explore the possibilities of greater cooperation among them through the infrastructure development and interconnections, intra and inter. So far, we've been in the right track, I would say. It is actually impressive for the international financial institution over the 3 full years of operational history to develop a portfolio of $8 billion today, and in all the regions, in all the Asian regions, including Central Asia. But in Central Asia, we're probably by now not less successful, but we're addressing it. The Central Asia is the name for this year. I think that I have already exhausted the time. Sorry. Yes, we'll continue in close cooperation with all the financial institutions actually presented at this panel, and gives me an opportunity finally to say thank you very much to World Bank, to EBRD, to Asian Development Bank for their contribution to this initial impressive start of the bank, because without them that would be less successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Konstantin. And I truly wish your institution to succeed in this very important endeavor. Look, I am very glad that you are here with our panel today, and I would like to ask you a slightly different question. We know that we have this new EU-Asia connectivity strategy. And I was watching very carefully the last Asia-Europe meeting during 2018, if I'm not mistaken, the autumn, October of 18. And there was a very important communique issued by the meeting from Federica Mogherini. And I read this communique. It seems to me that EU is starting more and more embrace this Euro-Asian connectivity issue. And how relevant can this strategy be for Central Asia? And what are the instruments, the investment, infrastructure, and trade instruments envisaged by this new strategy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgi. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, of course, I want to thank the Astana Economic Forum for giving the European Union an opportunity to present our own ideas on this matter. And I'm very happy to be back in this city where I've been so many times when we were negotiating our bilateral agreement between European Union and Kazakhstan, signed in 2015, which has allowed to expand our cooperation on 29 areas with this country. and the fact that we signed this with Kazakhstan also showed how mutually compatible various integration projects were and how the EU adapted to this. But I'm very happy to also to be in this prestigious panel, even if I'm the poorest speakers compared to the deep pockets of the bankers to my right. But particularly happy also to be moderated by you, Georgi. I want to say that you were an excellent Prime Minister of Georgia and an excellent Minister of Economy, and you did really a lot for your country in its association agreement and its being closer to the EU, and I wanted to pay public tribute to that because from our perspective, you did really a great job. But now it's my time to speak of the connectivity, the EU way, or the European manner. And indeed, as you referred in your introduction, on 19 September, we released our strategy on connecting EU and Asia, and I encourage you, if you are interested, of course, to know more, to go on our website to have a look at this, because it's much more comprehensive, of course, than what I will say in just a few minutes. But what are our view? Well, first of all, for us, connectivity is a long story. I know that one recently speaks more of connectivity, but connectivity is at the heart of the European Union project. We've done connectivity since 60 years. And more particularly, you may remember that the commissions of Jacques Delors between 85 and 95 emphasized a lot and invested a lot on these trans-European networks. And if you see how easily it is to travel from Lisbon to Helsinki, be it by train, road, or plane, with or without goods, and that you don't even have to show your papers. There's actually, most of the time, not even a customs post for private travelers. You will realize how far we've been. It doesn't mean, of course, we got it all right all the time. We also made mistakes, but it means that this is something which is very much at our DNA, which is very much the heart of what the European Union does. So it's not surprised that we speak now of Euro-Asian connectivity. And by all means, this is not something that is done just to reply to other initiatives. Often we are told, you do this because Chinese does that. No, it's not like that. How do we see connectivity, first of all, for us, and at the risk of being very boringly consensual, I will agree with what's been said. For us, this is 4 areas. First, transport. Secondly, energy. Thirdly, digital. And fourthly, the human dimension. Transport is not only hard infrastructure, building roads, airports, railways. It also means what we call the regulatory environment. As was said before, what is the point of having the best motorway of the world if at the end of the motorway there is a customs crossing which is impossible to cross, or where a duty will be levied that is going to make the trade uncompetitive, or etc., etc. So we have to look at this from a very holistic perspective. Energy, we need to have, and it was highlighted as well, we need to have more regional interconnection in energy. We need to have modern energy systems. We need to develop environmental friendly solutions, and Lilia mentioned the great potential that this region has in this context. Digital as well was mentioned, increased digital services, while of course for the EU maintaining a private data protection is important. And fourth and not least, human dimension. Connectivity is driven by people. We don't do connectivity for things. There also, what we've done in the past, and we will continue doing more, for instance, our Erasmus Plus program, where we spent on Central Asia 115 million in the last 4 years, is key. Cooperation on education, research, and also tourism, as Bruno was mentioned. We apply to these 4 areas basically 3 principles. First of all, sustainability. We want a sustainability not only environmentally, as has been mentioned, socially has been mentioned, but also what we call fiscal sustainability. It is unhealthy if a country is indebted to another one at the height of 40%, which is the case, for instance, in the region. It creates problems at the long-term political independence. And as was mentioned, we want high-quality project, not low-quality project, white elephants, and we want not connectivity just through Central Asia, but for Central Asia. Secondly, one needs to be comprehensive. I have mentioned not only the hardware aspect of connectivity, but the rules. I would add to that the business climate is extremely important, because connectivity will be done a lot by the private sector, of course, in synergy with what the banks or public funding can do, but a huge leverage with the private sector. And for private sector, business climate is essential. Here also, there are a couple of very important and key elements to be respected. One, WTO membership. That is the basis to have the minimum set of rules, how to cross a border, how to do customs valuation, etc., etc. Secondly, the bilateral agreements that the EU has concluded with, in the region with Kazakhstan, that we're also concluding now, negotiating now with Kyrgyz Republic and Uzbekistan, are also very complementary to our approach, because in these agreements and through these agreements, we also help developing a predictable, transparent environment for the business. And which leads me to my third principle, which is the rules-based approach. We must also have market access opportunities. I will not hide that, of course, European Union companies are also interested in the development in the region, and since we are a world leader in technology in many aspects, this should be held through fair market access rules, and that the procurement market for connectivity should not be reserved to only companies of one country, even if the country is paying or not. What does it mean in practice in Central Asia? We've been for a long time in Central Asia. Most of you will remember TRACECA project, Corridor Europe-Caucasus-Asia. We've had a number of programs like border management in Central Asia, BOMCA, which will continue. We have currently also regional programs on maritime safety, aviation safety, security, energy policy. And we have now an investment facility for Central Asia of 160 million euros supporting a number of projects and leveraging, thanks to banks, 1 billion euro. But all of this is extremely connected to also the political climate. I spoke of the business climate, but also the political climate. It is quite clear that one cannot impose connectivity if countries, as was mentioned, do not want to trade with each other because they don't like each other, because they have border disputes, or because they have whatever form of spats between themselves. You can have the best infrastructure, you can have the best financing, it won't work. In this regard, we're very encouraged by recent openings in Uzbekistan, and we very much support the programs of reform of President Mirziyoyev. Actually, it pays off very quickly. We have seen in 1 year that Uzbekistan trade worldwide increased by 18%, and with Kazakhstan by 30%, and with Kyrgyz Republic by 59%. So I'm not talking here in theory, I'm talking very practically. Last point, we, the European Union, are very open to cooperation with a number of actors. You mentioned, Georgi, the ASEM, the Asia-Europe meeting, which gathers 52 heads of states and governments, and where indeed, for instance, Kazakhstan is a member of ASEM, and where we also have came with a declaration going in this regard. But obviously, also the international financial institutions present here who have explained with great eloquence how useful they are, and it would be silly not to use their decades of experience in the region of what works and what works less if one wants to be efficient. China as well, we know the, of course, Belt and Road Initiative. We have no problem with it as long as the rules are respected. The rules I've mentioned before. We also have created in 2018 an EU-China connectivity platform. But it is important also that as I said, sustainability remains the key. And also, even BRI, according to Asian Development Bank study, the region needs 26 trillion in investment, $26 trillion investment in the next 20 years. That's 26,000 billion. So even if the Chinese spend the 1,000 billion of the program BRI, we're talking about 4%. We're talking about 4% if everything is spent. So that means that without cooperating between all of us around the panel and other countries, we will not be successful. So let me conclude by saying that, one, we are willing to share our experience in developing connectivity in the European Union with Central Asia. We are still a source of technology, of investment. We do this without a hidden geopolitical agenda. What we want to do is to develop stability, prosperity in this country for the good of the population. And also, I will not hide it, for our own business. So we are increasing our interest for Central Asia, very much so, through the various initiatives that I've mentioned. I should also mention that 2 days ago, we have released our new EU Central Asia strategy, where, of course, these principles I've mentioned today are incorporated. And as I said, we are here to stay for the common greater good. Thank you.
Thank you, Luc. We all welcome this new approach of the European Union to the development process of Central Asia and generally to the connectivity between Europe and Asia. And you very well described the process which is ongoing. And of course, EU engagement with this region will be extremely important for the development of this region. I intentionally did not stop any of the speakers. First, because it was very interesting. All of you gave us very important, very interesting insight on the topic of the discussion. But also, second, because you pretty much covered the second question, which I wanted to ask about software infrastructure and about how to promote trade, intra-regional trade. So let me now take some questions from the audience, and then we will close our discussion and this two-day very important meetings. And I am very glad that we turned this somewhat gloomy background into a more positive and more enthusiastic and more optimistic outlook. I'm very glad that we were able to do that. Now I will ask audience if there are any questions, please. Please. The gentleman.
I'm Vladimir Sherov, St. Petersburg State University, the same faculty as Dmitry Vladimirovich. Thank you, distinguished speakers, for your presentations. It's a rare opportunity to ask representatives of several development institutions. My question is maybe naive, but it's about connectivity. How things are arranged in the connections of your banks with the authorities, for example, in Kazakhstan or other Central Asia countries? Are you competing for projects, or are you dividing spheres of your agenda geographically by sector or by some other criteria? How does real work how is this work organized in connection with the national government? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to answer the question?
I can
World Bank.
Start.
World Bank.
Yeah. You know, the infrastructure needs in this country, the infrastructure gap in Kazakhstan, but also in other countries in Central Asia, is huge. If you put together all our resources, it's a small fraction of what is really needed. So there is even no ground to compete on in this regard. There is plenty for all of us to do, and actually plenty of space for the private sector and everybody else. So, and we do work together quite well. We do have quite a few projects which we are co-financing together. roads projects, energy projects. So I don't know, from my point of view, I think there is enough space for everybody, and what is important is really to coordinate and make sure that we don't chase the same project, because there are many other projects that we can work on. That's my short answer.
Thank you, Lilia. Bruno, please.
Yes, I fully concur with Lilia. We are in an area of the world where the needs exceed by many times the joint capacity of all of us. It's not the same in all the countries, but in this geography, I need to say that we really behave like brothers and sisters. We all communicate. And there is, amongst these, a remarkable example, which is in Uzbekistan. In Uzbekistan, we have an extraordinary relationship. We have joint discussions on a weekly basis at the local level. Recently in Washington, under the leadership of Cyril Muller, Vice President of the World Bank, we had a coordination meeting, not only out of these IFIs that are here. By the way, there's one important missing, which is the Asian Development Bank.
ADB, yes.
ADB is a very important player.
Yes.
here. He's not in
Very
the panel.
player.
But in Washington, we also had the Islamic Development Bank, and we had, and it is extraordinary how well coordinated we are. So I see absolutely. And by the way, also the governments, I think they also understand very well in which projects, which IFI has a little bit more of edge, which one could deliver probably a longer tenor or more capacity or more technology or innovation. And I really don't see competition, rather the contrary. I see a very close coordination.
Thank you. Vasil, you wanted to say something?
Fully agree with my colleagues. The needs of the region are so huge that our resources just cannot fill even a small part of this. What I would add is only that, at least from the EIB perspective, because we are a development bank, so our role is to fill what we call market gaps. Whatever can be taken care of by market forces basically should be taken care of by commercial institutions, commercial banks, etc. Our role is really to fill those gaps which are not covered by the market forces. This is one issue. The other issue is the additionality. We have to show also to our board, to our superiors, shareholders, we have to show that our projects have an additionality in terms of impact, in terms of environmental aspects, social impact, and so on. We also have to be able to show that obviously projects have some economic rate of return, which also means an economic value added to the country itself. And last but not least, in our case, as the Bank of the European Union, we are very much linked to the policies and strategy of the EU. So in Central Europe, in Central Asia, for us it means focusing primarily on so-called green projects, so projects which have very strong impact on, positive impact on the environment.
Thank you. Yes, Dimitri, please.
Yeah. Thank Grigory. I think, again, one interesting point of relation between development bank and national government, especially if we are talking about PPP project, infrastructure project, they have substantial political risk. Political risk, what kind of risk? Okay, we are starting project and then government will change regulation, will introduce some additional taxation, or, for example, in our case in Bulgaria, we financed some solar station. Tariff was extremely good, everything was fine, tariff was fixed for 15 years. But government was changed, arrived new government, and they told, okay, but it's totally unfair to have such a tariff. People cannot afford pay so much for electricity. It's necessary to change tariff. Wonderful. Wonderful for investors who invested money in this project. And in that case, I think a role of development bank is to some extent mitigate this type of risk, because we have government participation in our board of directors, board of governors, and we are better suited to negotiate with government. And participation of development bank is to some extent a stamp of quality, kind of insurance for private investors if private investors would like to participate in PPP project.
Thank you. I think the answer was very clear. There is a very strong spirit of cooperation and complementarity among very important institutions. I believe that demand is really much higher than the proposed financing capacities. So it will continue like this. Please. There was yes, please end.
Thank you. You have touched upon the political risks that can appear in Kazakhstan. Apart from that, what are the main challenges when you provide financing for instance, for the infrastructure projects? And what should be facilitated or strengthened in order you can broaden your financing in Kazakhstan? Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Well, I think like in any other country, the infrastructure projects require normally a long time for preparation. You need to have, depending on whether it is sovereign or it is private, you need to have different legislation in place for the signatories to commit under an agreement. We as IFIs, we have all of us very strict requirement of transparency on the procurement, on the environment, on the social aspects of the project. Therefore, is a rather complex process where many parties need to be very well coordinated and in line with legislation and in line with a fair and transparent competition.
Yes, Vasil, please.
In addition to what was mentioned, which I agree, I think very important for us is also the stability and predictability of the regulatory framework. This is very important, especially for PPP type of projects. Also, the equity, participation on the equity side and the quality of the promoter, of the implementer of the project itself.
Thank you. Lilia, please.
Let me just add one, which I think is very important, is do not rush. These are big projects that cost a lot, and this is infrastructure which is going to stay with you for decades. So don't rush, and sometimes governments want to start the project tomorrow without doing the proper analysis. Even yesterday sometimes. Without doing the proper analysis and due diligence. So my advice is don't rush. Take sometimes a little bit more. Even if it's an extra year, take this extra year, because then you will be stuck with this decision for decades.
Thank you. Please, we are running a bit beyond the time. The privilege of the last session is that nobody will kick us out from this room, so we can continue with one more question.
Спасибо. Я вижу действительно здесь участники настроены.
Thank you very much. I see the participants are very optimistic. My name is Zhubayev Saparbai. I represent the Kazakh Institute of Technology and Business. Of course, business. So this is needed for the business. And I would like to get your opinion. Lydia told me, do not rush. We were waiting for Trasica for 25 years. What was the obstacle for you to come? And can we implement what you propose within the nearest 20 years, where the United States don't want Russia to participate from the north and Iran from the south?
Who is the bravest to answer this question?
Start, but I think I tried to answer this question. Forget about China, forget about Iran, but try to concentrate on yourself. Try to improve relation between your neighbors, trying to find a regional solution, not to maybe think about China and United States.
Well, thank you. I think it was a very interesting panel discussion. Let me just say a few words and add one important aspect, which from my point of view is very important. We are talking about intra-regional trade. We are talking about using the full potential of the region in order to compensate the negative aspects and impacts of the global events and global downturn, I would say. But in order to give a boost to the economies of the Central Asian countries, I believe it's very important to attract foreign direct investments. And foreign direct investments will come to this region only in case there is a smooth connection among the countries, physical connection, plus only in case that this region can be considered as one holistic area, an area free of tariffs and non-tariff barriers. Some of the national governments in this region are, and we are in Kazakhstan, which is very pro-free trade. Some of the governments are not supportive to free trade to that extent. So we would really wish for this region to realize this full potential and open for trade, open for themselves for trade, and remove the barriers that are still existent. And of course, I would like to mention very briefly environmental issues that need regional approach. That only with regional and joint approach we can mitigate environmental risks in this region. And of course, the people of this region who are hardworking, modest, this is a treasure of this region. And of course, we need to utilize the full potential existent here in this region with the old ancient culture and with hardworking people proud of their origin and proud of their countries. I would like to once again thank the hosts and organizers of this conference. I would like to thank the government of Kazakhstan for keeping the country as a platform for very important international discussions. And I would like to thank also the Bretton Woods, Reinventing Bretton Woods Committee, who was also the co-organizer of this event. And let me ask the audience to join me with the applause, thanking the distinguished, absolutely outstanding panelists of today's session. Thank you very much.